guys, it is now 4 a.m. and I'm going to be doing I'm going to be reading chapter 5 of I'm going to be reading chapter 5 of the fanfiction of Wizards and Heroes. It's called I Solemnly Swear I'm Up to No Good. It's by storyforsomeone on AO3. The summary is, alright, you've got 2 minutes before I turn you into a ferret. Make it good. I'm a little sleepy, but also I was very determined to get this video uploading because it takes like a whole 2 hours before I go to sleep, so... The god of mischief, as a rule, did not oft concern himself with mortals. They were just so domesticated, all hurrying around, bumping into each other, keeping their little heads down. A nation of herbivores. As much as he loathed to admit it, Thor had actually been right on one thing. They were so petty and tiny. His damning mistake, however, was to presume this made them weak. Humans might be spectacularly ignorant and frail, but when they had an enemy to unite against, even he might want to think twice. His failed attempt to take New York the past year was evidence to that. So when Loki slipped out of Asgard's containment cells, he was the god of lies and deceit for a reason, it was a little insulting to think a mere cell would hold him for long. And traverse the secret passageways between worlds, he resolved to tread a little more carefully, to wait and watch before he struck, because this time his quarrel was not with the Earth, but a much deadlier target, one he would definitely need powerful allies to defeat. When it came to the Avengers, one did not take any chances. So, I don't know 100% when this was written. So, is his deadlier enemy the Avengers themselves? Or was it Thanos and the Avengers are going to be his powerful allies? I'm very unsure at that point. I'm curious, a low, musical voice drifted from behind him. Is longevity a usual trait found in your kind, or are you just remarkably young? Harry didn't think. In one blindingly fast motion, he whipped round and sent a powerful stupefy in the direction of the smooth voice. There was a shuddering crash, and the room trembled as someone was sent flying backwards. The man grunted in pain as he collided harshly with the wall. Harry kept his wand aloft and glared at the stranger. The man was uncommonly good-looking. That was the first thing he noticed. The second was that he must have a bizarre fetish for leather clothing. A dark jade cloak rippled out behind him, shifting to reveal glimpses of stealthily armored garments. He had sharp, angular features and even sharper green eyes, framed with aristocratic eyebrows and long black hair. An intangible kind of vitality seemed to simmer about him in the pale, luminescent blue-green eyes, in the predatory grace coiled in his lithe body, and the stark contrast between raven locks and ivory skin. There was a delighted smirk playing at the stranger's lips. Well met, magician. Who are you? Harry's voice was hard and unyielding. A friend. No, try again. My, so distrusting. How do you think I stayed alive this long? Harry retorted. No need to mention the convenient fact he couldn't actually die in the first place. The stranger winced as Harry's spell continued pressing him against the wall. Your magic is impressive. You don't know fuck all about my magic. Wow, dang. Back up. Chill, Harry. Goodness. Do I not? The image of the man in front of him seemed to warp and shimmer, bending the light around him, stretching almost imperceptibly against Harry's spell that kept him trapped against the wall. Curious, testing, measuring. Harry frowned. Then with a smirk the man just dissolved, disintegrating into 1,000 pieces that scattered like moss, brushing against his skin with the slightest flutter of wings, and suddenly a wave of force hit Harry from behind. He stumbled forward, spinning around, just as the flurry of shimmering fragments coalesced opposite him in the form of one smirking figure. Harry paused, hand raised where he had been about to blast his response. The man wasn't looking to attack. If anything, he looked expectant, curious. A glint of a challenge whispered in those all-knowing blue-green eyes. "Your move," those eyes seemed to say. Harry's lips quirked, bemused, but he extended his palm anyways, eyes flashing with intent. A single streak of flame blazed through the air, bursting and crackling. The man raised his own hand just as it reached him, and the fire extinguished with the hiss of a shield on ice. The stranger gave him a slightly withering look. "Is that all you can summon, magician? A sputtering candle wick?" Harry raised one eyebrow and waited. The small noise of indignation from the stranger was almost funny as Harry's spell took effect, as the wall behind him apparently decided to adopt the man as his own. It lurched forward, engulfing him in a trapping embrace at a wiggling of Harry's fingers, and clinging to him with all the determination of a dog dragging its favorite toy back to its den. "Matter manipulation," the man observed, even as he struggled against the sentient plaster. When it proved ineffective, he gave up with a huff. The wall hummed contentedly. "Clever, but magician, you should really learn to be more observant." "Oh, what makes you say that?" And suddenly the voice came from behind him. "A man of your abilities should really be able to recognize an illusion when he sees one, don't you think?" Harry whipped around, easily deflecting the amber blast of light that was hurled in his direction. The man, the real one, was standing smugly in front of him. With a flash of those green eyes, the version of him trapped in the wall, his double, faded away in the illusion that it was. Harry couldn't help the small, impressed smirk that crept to his lips. "Touché! Not one for delusion, are we?" the stranger remarked. "Pity, and I had such high hopes for you." So Harry turned his hand over slowly, wrist now bared to the ceiling, and rewove the world around him into a pattern more pleasing. The reality around them blurred and shifted, colors running together like paint, and suddenly the sight that surrounded them was not one of his living room, but of one much more familiar, a castle, ancient and sentient, its walls simmering with magic. Students in robes ran past them, echoing laughter, throbbing with memory, paintings tittering to one another as they passed. The air was alight with spells and enchantment. A ghost of a smile touched Harry's lips. "This is not real," the man mused, reaching out to press his palm against one of the stone walls, a surprised quirk of a smile. "But it is no illusion." Cocked a demand. His head turned to Harry, cocked a demand. "How?" Harry waved his hand absently, and the scene swept away. "Memory," he replied simply. The man's eyes glinted. "Interesting." And then he flung another spear of light. Harry batted it aside, and the dance began again. Spells flew between them, faster and faster, an exchange of attacks and parries, transfigurations and manipulations. This time, when they fought, something was different. Strikes were lighter and faster, spells testing rather than tentative, evasive maneuvers spawning easily from ducking and shielding. Magic visibly ignited in the air, their bodies moved in tandem with each other, instinctively following into a familiar rhythm, as though they had been fighting each other their entire lives. It felt playful, almost. Harry couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when the man started smiling, probably around the same time he did. It spread slowly across the stranger's face, like dawn breaking across the sky, and if Harry wasn't, well, Harry, he would have been horribly distracted by the unexpected beauty of it. As it was, the stranger provided a distraction of his own, flinging his palm out and sending a jet of brilliant green light shooting towards him. And just like that, Harry froze. The air trembled, time seemed to stop. In that moment, all Harry saw was Avada Kedavra from all those years ago, and the screams of all those he had lost, and something snapped. Without consciously summoning it, the Elder Wand was in his hand, and Harry sliced it through the air with a blinding light of Protego materialized around him. And Harry let out a cry of all those he failed to protect, and bam! The force of the spell ripped through the air, and the small house Harry had temporarily occupied collapsed outward at the explosion. The stranger looked at him for a moment, utterly stunned as he was sent flying backwards, and the green light fizzled out on the shield. A resounding boom shook the ground. When the air cleared, Harry Potter was standing in the epicenter of the explosion, his Elder Wand held loosely in his hand. As the stranger approached him cautiously, Harry raised his head. "Don't ever try that again." His voice was quiet and empty. "And what in Odin's name was that? Tad over a reaction, don't you think?" Avada Kedavra, the killing curse. Don't think I haven't seen it before. You think I was trying to kill you? No other spell is that exact shade of green. Harry glared at him. I've been at the end of it enough to know. The man tilted his head curiously. The appearance of magic does not depend on the spell, but the caster. He raised a hand and a small orb of gently growing green light appeared in his palm. Harry flinched. See? Green is my signature, he smirked. Besides, if you managed to kill someone with a witch light, I'd be thoroughly impressed. Harry stared at the light for a moment, he ran a hand agitatedly through his hair. Right, sorry about that. The stranger cocked an eyebrow. You wield a formidable weapon, magician. If I were a lesser being, I'd have been killed. Hey, I already apologized. Don't push it, Harry grumbled, casually slipping the Elder Wand back into his rucksack. It was you who decided to break into my house in the first place. Oh, how silly of me. I should have just rung the doorbell, he said dryly. I'll remember that in the future. Harry rolled his eyes. Who are you, and how did you get past my wards? Loki of Asgard, at your service. The man Loki smirked. Believe me when I say I'm paying you a compliment in breaking through your wards. I haven't had that fun in years unraveling them. All original spell work, I presume. Bemused, Harry nodded. Loki grinned. Ingenious. So you're a wizard. I'm a god, he retorted sharply, the change in tone jarring. Immortal and all-powerful. Do not insult me so. Right, dragons and magic and mermaids. Why not gods? I suppose you're all best mates with Zeus and Hercules, then. Don't be ridiculous. Zeus is a terrible conversationalist. Harry snorted. I wouldn't have thought the god of lightning would be such a buzzkill. Oh, I don't know. My brother, the god of thunder, never lets me have any fun. I didn't know you had a brother. All at once, Loki stiffened, and something oddly vulnerable flitted across his face. I don't. But you said... He's no brother of mine. The words were cold, and Harry got a strong sense of stay away at all costs. Maybe it was the slightly feral look in Loki's eyes. The real question, said Loki suddenly, is who are you? That was weird. Someone worthy of a god's interest, apparently. Do you know how many magicians have ever been born on Midgard? Loki didn't wait for an answer. None. Never in the history of time has there been a, what did you call it, wizard in this realm. And then there's you. If you say anything resembling a prophecy or chosen one, I swear to God, I will punch you. Loki blinked. What? No. Don't you see? You and me, we're the same. Am I a god then, too? That explains a lot. I swear Destiny seems to have never heard the term overkill. Magic! Loki interrupted in frustration. The art is all but forgotten in all the 9 realms, but for very few, we are kin, you and I. And it was at that moment, on the word kin, that Loki's voice broke ever so slightly. His voice, his silver tongue, caught in a note of certainty, of something raw and broken and startlingly genuine. It was then that Harry saw it, as clear as though it was reflected from him, or Tony or Natalie. It was loneliness. It was a burden. It was a buried desperation, a need for acceptance, so well hidden you would almost doubt it even existed. But in that moment, Harry saw himself, a darker, far more lost version of himself. But it could have well been him. If there had been no Ron and Hermione, no Ginny and Albus, and James and Lily. So with a resigned sigh, Harry conjured up 2 chairs and sat down, gesturing for Loki to take the second. All right, you've got 2 minutes, before I turn you into a ferret. Make it good. It was all Loki's fault, really. Without really meaning to, 2 minutes had turned into 2 hours, and a chance meeting into a regular occurrence. The god would turn up at the oddest of times, night or day. It was impossible to predict his arrival. True to his word, he always rang the doorbell. Sometimes he seemed content to just watch Harry, arresting green eyes and thoughtful and curious. The jade gaze would gleam on the occasion Harry performed the odd bit of magic, following his movements hungrily. Sometimes he'd come with questions, bizarre things like, if you cast a ward around an area that never came back and there's no one or nothing to breach it, does the ward still exist? At which point Harry would pause whatever he was doing, eyebrow raised. This is sounding worryingly content theory-like. You haven't been felling any trees in forests, have you, lately, have you? What? Never mind. Often he didn't seem to need Harry to talk back. So if your transfiguration is an illusion covering up the interior object, surely the untransfiguration isn't the removal of a transfiguration, but rather a reversal, a second alteration of the physical structure, a retransfiguration. It's fascinating, Harry said. You know all of these words, and they're all English, but when you string them together into sentences, they just don't make any sense. Loki gave him a look, all flashing dark eyes and withering aggravation, as though willing the other person to shrivel up and die just by the force of his gaze. It was somewhat ruined by the quirk of amusement on his lips. "Shut up, Harry!" And was that a familiar phrase? Loki seemed to get an immense enjoyment from insulting him and spurring him to retaliate. "What is that gibberish you keep sprouting? You're completely butchering the Latin, and you don't even get me started on the ancient Greek." First, Loki's presence was mildly irritating. The word boundaries seemed to be a foreign concept for the god. Then, alarmingly quickly, it became just another quirk of Harry's life. Soon Harry was automatically reaching for a second mug of coffee when he boiled the kettle, just on the off chance he would see a flash of green in the corner of his eye. Make no mistake, Harry didn't particularly like him. Loki was demanding and rude and elusive, and took offense to the smallest of things. He was frighteningly clever and endlessly curious and just a tiny bit terrifying when that restless glint flinted across his eyes. But then the arrangement kind of worked. By some unspoken agreement, neither of them mentioned their pasts. Loki didn't volunteer any information, and Harry didn't press him, so Loki gave him the same courtesy. It was refreshing in that little house. They were just Harry and Loki, and nothing else mattered. Of course, one could only run from the past for so long. Fury's expression had a grim sort of satisfaction on his face as he gave the order to move out, eyes on the small image of live footage on his tablet. Two figures emerging from a small house on the outskirts of the city could just be seen from the satellite image. One laughed at something the other said, and in turn they shoved them back half-heartedly, hand lingering on the other's shoulder. Fury's eyes bulged. If this wasn't evidence that Harry was an enemy of the state, Fury didn't know what was. He wasn't about to wait for Harry to start blowing up New York to take him out. And now, he finally had an excuse. About a mile away from Harry's position, airships were closing in, the sky above darkening with sudden storm clouds. A single figure darted in amongst the cloud, a flash of red illuminated by lightning. As the first crack of thunder rippled across the sky, Loki glanced up. "What is it?" Harry asked, seeing his expression. Loki grimaced. Do you remember what I told you about my brother? Only that he's the god of—" Harry stopped and looked up. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." "He's here?" "Apparently." It was at that moment a figure dropped from the sky and landed with a resounding boom a few feet away. They stumbled backwards at the impact. "Loki!" A deep, roaring voice echoed out. "He doesn't sound very happy," Harry said blithely. "Believe me, this is him in a good mood." "What are you doing here, brother?" And the figure in red stepped forward, and Harry caught a glimpse of him for the first time. Longish blonde hair, rugged features, incredibly powerfully built, a magnificent hammer in his hand. He couldn't look any more different from Loki. "The cell wasn't exactly to my taste," Loki replied coolly. "I thought I'd do some traveling, see the 9 realms." "Enough!" Harry winced. Did he really have to shout all the time? "This ridiculous venture ends now," Thor said firmly. The All-Father has decreed it so." "Ah, dear father," Loki sighed. "He never learns." "Do not speak of our father that way." "Your father," Loki snarled. "Do not forget we are in no way related. We grew up together. We played together. And yet, always in the shadow of your greatness, the mighty Thor. Boys. Harry stepped between them. "While this is all fascinating, I get the strong impression that this argument has occurred on numerous occasions, so I'll save you the trouble of finishing it to its epic conclusion." Thor was looking at him strangely. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Harry, friend of your brother's." "Well, I say friend." Thor looked at Loki incredulously. "You have a friend?" Always the tone of surprise. Harry snorted. "Well, Harry," Thor said a little uncomfortably, "you shouldn't be here. I'm sorry, the last time I checked, it was you guys who broke into my house." Loki raised raised his eyebrows. "The house that you blew up with your nifty shield charm." Harry waved his hand dismissively. "Technicalities. So, as flattered as I am to have two gods in the remnants of my living room, I can't help but wonder what in Merlin's name you're both doing here." "My brother has committed a serious crime," Thor said gravely. "I am to return him to Asgard to complete his sentence in confinement." Loki pouted. See what I mean? Complete buzzkill. "Harry, you should leave whilst you still can. If you are truly a friend of my brother's, it would pain me to see you hurt." Thor glanced fleetingly at the sky. Harry's eyes narrowed. "Why? What's coming?" "Oh, Thor, you didn't," Loki said. "Answer me," Harry demanded. Just then a booming voice echoed through the storm, and Harry heard the sound of jet engines roaring overhead. "Would the man who identifies as Harry please a step away from the accused? I repeat, we have the area surrounded. Step away from the accused." Harry looked at Loki. "Accused? Humans don't like me much. I can't imagine why. This is our final warning. If you do not comply, we will be forced to engage hostilities on your position." All right. Harry put a few feet between him and Loki. "There, is that agreeable?" The voice didn't answer, but above him Harry saw one of the jets descend through the clouds and touch the ground a little way off. Men in black began pouring out, and Harry groaned. "Not this again." Just then, the voice from the sky appeared behind him, this time without the sonorous amplifying. "Loki of Asgard, you are hereby under arrest for your crimes against the people of Earth. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say—" "Oh, spare me the platitudes!" Harry spun around just as the image of Loki shimmered and disappeared in front of the agent, and suddenly there were 3, 4, 7 Lokis, all standing there grinning his signature smirk. "Man, you have got to treat me that trick," Harry whistled. The nearest Loki winked at Harry. "Stand down, Loki." Thor was speaking again. "This doesn't have to get messy." "Oh, brother dear," the god of mischief smirked. "It's almost like you don't know me at all." Then Loki twirled his wrist in an elegant gesture, and the agent who had spoken was sent flying backwards, crumpling into his colleagues and scattering them like a pack of cards. Cries of outrage emanated from all around them. Thor looked furious. Harry glared at Loki. "And you wonder why they don't like you?" Loki shrugged. "I didn't like his tone." See, this is why Loki is like my third favorite person in the MCU. "Right, that's enough." They marched over and grabbed Loki by the arm. "We're going home." I don't have it," Loki spat. "Now let go of me." An ancient-looking spear materialized in Loki's hands, and suddenly the brothers were fighting, exchanging blows faster than the eye could see. Thor was a sight to behold, the mighty swing of Mjolnir causing the very air to tremble in its wake. Loki was like a wrath, darting and flitting around his larger opponent with unparalleled speed and agility. It was impossible to judge who had the upper hand. In that moment they truly looked like gods. Harry could only stand there for a moment mesmerized, and wondering who the hell he was supposed to be helping out of the two, when there he heard an almost inaudible click of the safety trigger being removed from behind him. He whipped around just in time to see 20 or so men in black surrounding him, guns aimed steadily at his forehead, detached expressions on their face. One stepped forward. To the man identified as Harry, "You are hereby under arrest for consorting with the enemies of the state and harboring unregistered abilities with hostile intentions." One of Harry's eyebrows rose. "Come again. If you cooperate, you will not be harmed." "Not what I asked." "Do you agree to the terms?" "You haven't told me anything," Harry exclaimed. "I don't even know who you are." "We are not your enemy, Harry. Do you agree to the terms?" "Do I really have a choice?" From the corner of his eye, Harry saw Thor knock Loki to the ground. His spear flew from his hand, and Loki let out an involuntary gasp of pain. The agents around him retreated hastily. Harry's gaze hardened. "If you'll excuse me a moment, gentlemen," he said curtly, "you may be content to ignore the gods fighting not 3 feet away from you, but I am not." Just as Thor raised his hammer, Harry flung out a palm and cast a powerful berry charm between them. It was a slight rendition of the Protego spell that he had tweaked a century or so back. There was a thundering gong as the hammer rebounded, and the shield lit up in a flurry of gold upon impact. Everyone turned to stare at Harry. "You stopped my hammer! You stopped his hammer?" The gods spoke simultaneously. "Do I have your attention now?" Harry said. "Silence. Good. Now, Harry walked over and offered Loki a hand. After a moment, the god took it and Harry pulled him up. Shall we try this again, without any of the threats or guns or magic hammers? Harry glared at Thor, who had the decency to look a little sheepish. Around him, it appeared the agents were quietly freaking out. This wasn't part of the plan. It was supposed to be a simple capture and secure. No one expected this Harry would be in league with Loki. Well, they probably weren't supposed to have, but... And they watched the stranger as they watched the stranger conversing so easily with the two gods, their eyes bulging at Harry's hand on Loki's shoulder, one of them panicked. His finger squeezed down on the trigger, and there was an ear-splitting crack as the bullet shot through the air and found its mark in Loki's chest. With one shot, the piece shattered. Loki's face contorted as he stumbled backwards, a gasp of pain escaping his lips. Thor let out a yell of fury and caught his brother and Harry. Harry went rigid. He turned very slowly to face the agent who had fired the bullet, eyes aflame with a quiet, lethal fury. And when he spoke, every agent cringed at the thrum of power in his voice. You should not have shot my friend. Well, there we go. I feel like with, all of these books, with this one and with The Wand and the Shield, it's there's, a lot of build-up between, Shield and, Harry, always, because Shield just has to meddle in everything, and Harry is just, not that. And then there's always just, this big moment where it all comes down to it, and it's there's tension in the air, and it's peace can be achieved right now. Everything can take a slow downturn, and everything will be great. And then some idiot decides to fire a gun at the all-powerful being in front of him, and it's dude, maybe you should have thought that through a little better. And I'm not seeing the brain power here, I'm kind of missing it a bit. And it's just I'm too tired to actually do this. Anyways, thanks guys. I will see you later. And yeah, bye. This was written by Story for Someone on AO3. It's of Wizards and Heroes. Bye.